Ever wondered about those crazy theories about Nazis and ancient artifacts? You know, the ones about hidden cities, lost technology, and occult rituals? Well, buckle up because we're about to dive deep into some seriously wild stuff. We're talking secret societies, ancient texts, and a whole lot of how the heck could they do that? Prepare for a mind-blowing journey into the world of Nazi occultism and their obsession with forbidden archaeology. The Nazi agenda, searching for the gods. Okay, so we all learn about history in school, right? But what if the official story is just a cover-up for something much more sinister? What if the leaders of one of the most evil regimes in the 20th century weren't just cruel dictators, but were actually obsessed with ancient myths and desperately trying to bring some kind of mythical past back to life? That's a pretty mind-blowing thought, isn't it? Not many people know Adolf Hitler was a painter. Even fewer people know that Adolf Hitler was secretly an archaeologist. Hitler used archaeology and ancient history to prove that the Nazis were descendants of a mysterious antediluvian civilization. You won't believe the lengths Hitler went through to prove his insane theories. Hitler was sworn in as Germany's chancellor and leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party in 1933. At that moment, he seized control of every institution in Germany, including its universities. Can you guess what he did next? Hitler changed the curriculum to align with his very specific doctrines. One thing he did in particular was change the history books. Universities under Nazi rule told students that the Germanic people were descendants of the Aryan master race, and that the Aryans had once ruled the entire world. It wasn't enough to just tell the students. Hitler wanted to prove it to them with hard evidence, and this was where things started to get nuts. The Nazis began searching for proof of Atlantis, weapons that belonged to gods, and even the Ark of the Covenant. In 1935, leader of the SS Heinrich Himmler established the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society, aka the Ahnenerbe. It was founded by the military but classified as a private organization. The goal of this organization was to research the history of the Aryan race. You can think of the Ahnenerbe as a think tank. It was an extremely well-funded institution with Germany's brightest minds and most clever archaeologists. Their massive annual budget allowed them to do archaeological excavations all over the world, and that's precisely what they did. Germany's secret think tank sent their researchers to Bulgaria, Russia, Africa, and even Iceland. Iceland is a particularly interesting case because the Nazis believed it to be the original site of Thule. Wait, what in the world is Thule? Long before World War II even started, there was the Thule Society. The group was founded in Munich after World War I ended. They sponsored the German Workers' Party, which would later be organized by Hitler into the Nazi Party. What's crazy is that they started as a German study group. A wounded World War I veteran named Walter Neuhaus studied art in Berlin and at some point joined with the Order of Teutons, a shadowy secret society. He formed the original Thule Society. This is like finding out that the Illuminati started the Christian church. Did you ever think that Nazis could have been this deeply embedded in mysticism and secret orders? The primary focus of the Thule Society was to discover the origins of the Aryan race. You couldn't even join their club unless you signed a special blood declaration concerning your lineage. Members of the Thule Society could not have any Jewish blood or any non-white blood, and neither could their spouse. It was without a doubt one of the most racist organizations in human history. The word Thule goes back to ancient Greece. It was a mystical land where the sun set and never rose again. Thule is mentioned by the famous Roman poet Virgil, spoken of as a place at the edge of the known world. An earlier name for Scandinavia was Thule. The Thule Society of Germany decided the real legendary Thule was located in Iceland and that it was the ancient capital of the Hyperboreans, who were a mystical race of supremely powerful humans. From the Hyperboreans were born the Aryans, and from them the Germans. In 1938, Himmler sent a team of researchers to Iceland in search of a mystical place of worship. Hitler and Himmler believed there would be lost temples in Iceland where the ancient Aryans paid homage to their ancestral gods. When I say ancestral gods, I mean Thor and Odin and the other gods of Norse mythology. Hitler believed they were real beings who had lived in physical bodies during the days of Thule. The expedition was a disaster. The Icelandic government was not interested in Nazi scientists roaming around, so the operation was a failure. But before the Nazis left, they did allegedly find a mystical place of worship inside of a cave. It's never been confirmed, but they claim to have found it. Another thing the Nazis supposedly found is an artifact known as the Mythos stele. I don't know much about it because there are almost no records of this artifact, but it was supposedly found in 1935 at an unidentified site in an unknown country. The stele was huge, carved with what appeared to be alien symbols. It was embossed with a terrifying image of some sort of six-armed deity holding power orbs in each of its hands. No one knows if this artifact is real, or if it is real, where it is today. I've only scratched the surface of the Nazi Empire's secret archaeological programs. Keep watching because it only gets crazier from here. How to start a war with mysticism. I want to tell you how a society of mystics instigated a world war and changed humanity forever. How many members do you think the Thule Society attracted at the beginning of the 20th century? They had 1,500 followers in Bavaria. While this might seem like a small number, it's important to remember that political movements can gain traction through various means beyond sheer numbers. Even with such low numbers, the Thule Society conducted a failed kidnapping of Bavarian Prime Minister Kurt Eisner in December of 1918. Then, during the Bavarian Revolution of 1919, members of the Thule Society infiltrated the government and attempted a coup. Days later, the communist government in Munich raided the Thule Society's base and executed 7 members. In response, the Thule Society organized an uprising. Some of the members who were killed by the communists were related to European royalty. Walter Neuhaus himself was killed, the man I told you about earlier who started the society. The communists also killed Countess Hila von Westarp and Prince Gustav of Thurn and Taxis. Even though their numbers were small, the members of the society were of great influence. In 1918, the Thule Society purchased a weekly newspaper in Munich. This would become the main Nazi newspaper and one of the primary sources for Nazi propaganda. It's amazing what a few crazy people with a newspaper at their disposal can do, or one billionaire with a social media platform. Throughout 1919, the Thule Society worked hard to join forces with extreme right groups. 1919 was also the year that Adolf Hitler joined the party. This was almost 2 decades before World War II, when Adolf was practically a nobody who liked to paint pictures in his spare time. The Thule Society bonded with the German Workers' Party. They were like inseparable best friends, with members from one group embedded in the other group. In 1920, the German Workers' Party, with help from Thule, created the Nazi Party. Top members of Thule went on to have prominent positions in Nazi Germany, such as Dietrich Eckart, who coached Hitler on his public speaking skills, and also Erich Jan Hannessen, whom Hitler dedicated his twisted manifesto Mein Kampf to. Other members of the Thule Society and the Nazi Party included Rudolf Hess, Hermann Göring, Hans Frank, and Alfred Rosenberg. This was Hitler's inner circle. If you're not familiar with at least one of these names, I recommend doing a deep dive later. You'll learn stuff that will make your blood boil. Hermann Göring was one of the worst war criminals in human history and was eventually convicted for it. Rudolf Hess was the deputy Führer until 1941. Rosenberg was the head of foreign affairs. Another member in both parties was Heinrich Himmler, the man who launched archaeological expeditions across the globe in search of proof of the Aryan race. Are you shocked that a small fringe group of aristocrats with racist ideologies and ties to secret societies could achieve such power? Can you guess what happened to the Thule Society? Hitler himself destroyed it. Early in 1920, after the formation of the Nazi Party, Hitler began severing links to the Thule Society. Not because Hitler didn't believe in it, but because he and the others no longer needed it. They had evolved, for lack of a better word. The Thule Society fell into decline and was fully dissolved within a couple years, long before Hitler ever came into power. Enough time passed between Hitler joining the society and becoming the Chancellor that he was able to distance himself from the esoteric organization. In fact, after 1933, Hitler clamped down hard on mystic societies. He, more than anyone, knew their power. He suppressed occultists, shut down Freemasons, and prohibited books with ideas that the Nazis thought were too radical. And now for a quick break. But first I wanted to give a shout out and big thank you to Bobby Welsh and Michael for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. The Nazi Indiana Jones. Arthur Poznański is one of the most controversial figures in 20th century archaeology. Some scholars still call him the Nazi Indiana Jones. Arthur was born in Austria in 1873, a time when the world was a very different place. I don't want to make anyone feel bad, but by the age of 23, Arthur was already participating in expeditions to explore the upper reaches of the Amazon River. By 25, he was an experienced navigator. Arthur became the director of a river navigation company and the captain of his own steamer. But Arthur did run into some trouble. There was a dispute between Bolivia and Brazil that started a small war. Arthur was wounded and captured by the forces of Brazil, but he escaped and took refuge in Europe. Years later, he moved back to Bolivia, and that was when he became interested in ancient history. In 1903, Arthur visited the magical site of Tiwanaku for the first time. He was hooked from the get-go. If you've ever seen Tiwanaku with your own eyes, I'm sure you can relate. It's a truly captivating place. Tiwanaku started as a small settlement on the shores of Lake Titicaca around 2,000 years ago. By 800 AD, Tiwanaku was the ceremonial center of a vast kingdom. It reached a staggering population of 70,000 people. Then the unknown struck, as it so often does. The Tiwanaku Empire was strong right up until the year 1000, when something decimated them. 50 years later, the empire was in ruins and Tiwanaku was abandoned. To this day, scientists have never confirmed what caused the fall of one of South America's earliest, most powerful, and most enigmatic civilizations. Arthur was one of the first people to study the ancient cultures of the Peruvian highlands. He searched the shores of Lake Titicaca for clues. He studied Incan archaeological sites. His work was so cherished that the German government gave him the honorary title of professor in 1914. In 1945, Arthur Poznański published his most important book. It encapsulated everything that he had learned through his lifetime of research. In the book titled Tiwanaku, the Cradle of American Man, he expressed views and opinions that mainstream archaeologists did not agree with. Arthur claimed that Tiwanaku was constructed 17,000 years ago by an advanced civilization. He noted comparisons between the massive stone monoliths in Tiwanaku and the large stone statues on Easter Island. It was his belief that Tiwanaku was the cradle of all South American civilizations. Now here's where the controversy kicks in. Arthur and his Nazi colleagues thought very little of the locals in Bolivia. They didn't believe that the ancestors of the Ahnenerbe people were civilized enough to build Tiwanaku. Instead, Arthur proposed that a superior race evolved in South America or immigrated there from Europe. To make a long story short, Arthur proposed that Tiwanaku was built by either the Aryans from Nazi ideology, the lost folk of Atlantis, or aliens. These were all preferable to admitting that people with dark skin could build wonders. The ancestors of the Ahnenerbe, according to Arthur, were a lesser human species that may have done the grunt work for the more advanced Aryans. These theories, rooted in white supremacy, had a profound and damaging impact on how the history of South America was understood and presented. You can see why Arthur's known as the Nazi Indiana Jones. It's a catch-22 because Arthur Poznański made huge contributions to South American archaeology, but at the same time his ideas were so horrific that he's gone down in history as a villain. What are your thoughts on the duality of this situation? Let me know in the comments, and don't hold anything back. The slaughter at the grove of the Saxons. It's common knowledge that the Nazis were anti-Jewish, but did you know that they were also anti-Christian? When Heinrich Himmler wasn't busy searching for evidence of Atlantis and the Holy Grail, he was building memorials to slain pagans. In the early 20th century, you could hardly show an ankle in the United States of America without someone screaming Satan. Yet in Nazi Germany, they were commemorating pagan warlords and demonizing Christian kings. Let's go back in time to October of 782. The king of the Franks, Charlemagne, condemned 4,500 Saxons to death. The Saxon wars were raging, and Europe was about to become predominantly Christian the hard way. In 772, Charlemagne entered Saxony with the full intention of conquering it. And he did, only it took him 33 years. Charlemagne claimed authority over all of Saxony. One of his first actions was to destroy the sacred pillar known as the Irminsul. It was like going to Egypt and destroying the Great Pyramid, or like going to Italy and tearing down the Vatican. The Irminsul was one of the most important objects in all of Saxon paganism. It was to the pagans what the Kaaba is to Islam. Legend has it that once the Irminsul was torn down, Charlemagne built a church in its place and had it blessed by Pope Leo III. Charlemagne saw himself as spreading Christianity and uniting Europe. During these brutal wars, 4,500 Saxons were cornered in Verden, Germany. The Saxons were given the option of surviving if they agreed to give up their pagan ways and devote themselves to Christianity. When they rejected the offer, Charlemagne had them all killed. There's a lot of controversy surrounding the event. Researcher Matthias Becker said the number of executions was likely greatly dramatized. It may have only been a few hundred soldiers or even a small group who was hanged. Legends can sometimes have a tendency to exaggerate. Guess what the Nazis thought of King Charlemagne? They hated him. Heinrich Himmler's adjutant for culture, Hermann Gauch, suggested that they change Charlemagne's name. He was officially renamed Karl the Slaughterer. Hermann also advocated for a memorial to the victims of the massacre at Verden. In 1934, this ancient execution became a major topic for debate. There were even plays performed that painted the Christian king as a murderous tyrant bent on genocide. In 1935, German architect Wilhelm Huberter was commissioned to build the Grove of the Saxons. It was to be a memorial for the fallen Saxon soldiers. I'm sure most people don't have any issues with a memorial for victims of a cruel mass execution, but the memorial was only part of a larger and more diabolical plot. The same year the Grove of the Saxons was built, the annual celebration of Charlemagne was cancelled. It was replaced by a lecture on the Saxon butcher. Anti-Charlemagne propaganda was pushed in the public's face by none other than Alfred Rosenberg. Remember earlier I told you that Rosenberg was part of both the Thule Society and the Nazi Party? Rosenberg led a campaign of anti-church and anti-papacy rhetoric, up until Hitler told him to stop. What I have to say next is very important. It doesn't matter how crazy the views of the ruling party are, they must align with public opinion, on the outside at least, where people can see them. In 1942, the Nazis celebrated the 1200th anniversary of King Charlemagne's birth. People were understandably confused. After years of bashing Charlemagne and the church, suddenly Nazi Germany was celebrating Charlemagne and being friendly with the Vatican. So what happened? Joseph Goebbels, the leading propagandist for the Nazi Party, started issuing positive statements about Charlemagne. He was quoted as saying in private that it was best for state propaganda to align with popular opinion. Hitler himself agreed, which was why he asked, more like told, Rosenberg to stop hating on Charlemagne. It was making too many Germans upset, and upset people are harder to control. Missing Nazi treasure. It's been estimated that the Nazis looted 20% of all the art in Europe. You won't believe some of the relics they stole, including some that are believed to have incredible powers. It was only about a year ago that the Dutch National Archive released some previously secret documents. Among those documents was a treasure map marking the spot with a huge X where a secret Nazi treasure was buried. Treasure hunters across Europe rushed to try and dig it up. The story goes that 4 German soldiers were left with a whole heap of coins, diamonds, watches, and other pieces of jewelry in the Netherlands in 1945. They had about $25 million worth of loot, but were about to be taken by Allied forces. Naturally, they buried the treasure. Everyone knows that you bury your treasure if you can't spend it right away. The soldiers then marked the spot on the map, which was in the National Archives of the Netherlands until last year. When it was released, dozens of researchers and amateur archaeologists flocked to the small Dutch town of Omeren. They were packing shovels and picks and were about ready to tear the place up until local authorities asked them to stop. The treasure has not been found. Dutch law says that archaeological excavations are prohibited without a special certificate. You're not even allowed to carry a metal detector without permission. Experts speculate that the treasure was likely already ransacked anyway, possibly by Dutch villagers returning to their homes after the end of the war. This exciting story is just one example of Nazi treasure. I have a few more I think you're going to be interested in. The looting started before the war. In the early 1930s, the Nazis began stealing the property of German Jews. They continued plundering until 1945. Hitler's army stole gold, currency, and especially art and historical relics. Some of the famous art the Nazis stole include the portrait of Dr. Gachet by Vincent van Gogh, The Lady in Blue by Gustav Klimt, pieces from Rembrandt, Rubens, and so many more. The Nazis occupied some 30 countries and territories, which gave them a lot of museums to ransack. When the war thankfully ended, the Allied group known as the Monuments Men recovered looted treasure from over 1,000 repositories in Germany and Austria. The Germans had stashed most of their stolen goods close to home. Most of it was found tucked away in abandoned mine shafts. Check out this image from Wikipedia of bags upon bags of gold. The picture was taken inside a salt mine in Germany. That's a lot of gold. Enough gold to give us each one little piece, right? There's more treasure out there to find. In 1922, the British newspaper Express ran a fascinating story on treasure hunter Roger Miklos. For 40 years, Roger insisted that he found the wreckage of a lost Nazi U-boat. Roger kept saying the U-boat was packed with so much gold and so many artifacts it would beat the tomb of Tutankhamun. Sadly, Roger died in 2018. He had told everyone for years about the sunken submarine, but never revealed its exact location. His family is now stuck with a stockpile of Roger's confusing documents. Somewhere in those papers is the location of the lost U-boat, allegedly. Roger was convinced that in the final days of World War II, the Nazis put together a modified fleet of cargo smuggling submarines. The top players of Nazi Germany packed those submarines full of treasure and fled to Argentina. As of today, not a single one of these secret subs has ever been found, but that doesn't mean they didn't exist. There's one more artifact I have to tell you about, but that's coming up a little later. It's an artifact so powerful that the Crusaders allegedly used it to win battles. The Christian witch craze and the Hexenkartothek. There was a branch of the Nazi SS that has been forgotten even by most historians. It was a branch with such a bizarre mission objective that you're hardly going to believe I'm telling the truth, even after all you've heard so far today. In German, it was called the Hexenkartothek. That translates in English as H Special Order. The members of this special project were tasked with investigating witch trials. The investigation was sanctioned by Heinrich Himmler himself. Rudolf Levine was the SS officer in charge of seeing it through. You might be wondering why the Nazis wanted to investigate witch trials. Were they thinking of bringing back public witch burnings? Heinrich tasked the group with collecting all known historical records of witch trials for one very simple reason. He wanted to use the trials to paint the Catholic Church in a bad light. It was all part of Germany's war on religion. Himmler was going to use the witch trials as proof that the Catholic Church has repeatedly tried to eliminate German heritage. It was the perfect subject to get ordinary people riled up, blame the church for burning German women alive, and change public opinion of the Vatican. It was a bold move, one that had the Nazi regime titled Europe's first pro-witch government. I don't want to say anything positive about the Nazis at all, so I won't. But don't you kind of wish that there was another government that would spring up as pro-witch? One that didn't try to exterminate anyone? In 1935, Nazi pamphlets were handed out to the public with huge eye-catching headings that read, "The Christian Witch Craze." The pamphlets claimed that the witch hunts of the Middle Ages were done purposely by the church to exterminate Aryan women. Nazis were from Atlantis. Did Nazis come from Atlantis? That's what Hitler thought. Hitler was so convinced that his own so-called Aryan ancestors were secretly from the lost city of Atlantis that he spared no expense trying to find it. Most of what people today know about Atlantis comes from the writing of Plato in ancient Greece 2300 years ago. Plato described Atlantis as an enemy of Athens. Atlantis even attacked Athens, only to have their ships forced to retreat. Atlantis lost support of the gods and their civilization was punished. Then the gods pushed their shining city into the sea. Plato didn't say much else about Atlantis. He noted that the sunken island is somewhere beyond the Pillars of Hercules, also known as the Strait of Gibraltar. But that's pretty much the whole tale. Or is it? To find out, let's investigate Georg Lanz von Liebenfels. He was a monk with some wild ideas. Born in 1874, Georg grew up obsessed with fables and fairy tales. He was especially interested in the legends of King Arthur and the Holy Grail. He became a monk in 1893, living under a fake name at a monastery. In 1894, he had a religious awakening. The monk claimed that he found the tombstone of a forgotten Knight Templar. He was instantly enlightened. Jorg understood that he belonged to a supreme race which he would call the Aryans. Jorg believed all other races to be lower than his own. This is the dark beating heart of racist ideology. The roots go all the way down to Jorg Lanz von Liebenfels. He left the monastery in 1899 and the next year founded the Order of the New Templars. He was trying to recreate the Knights Templar. Jorg prophesied that the lost Aryan civilization would one day return. He was also under the belief that the Aryans were in fact the original inhabitants of Atlantis. In 1905, Jorg wrote a book called Theozoology, where he basically said we should force sick people and people he considered lesser to be sterilized. He also wanted to make castrated people work as slaves. He basically worshipped the Aryan race as superhumans. To justify this crazy stuff, he twisted the Bible, saying Eve messed up with a demon and that's why lesser races exist. He blamed this for blonde women liking dark-skinned men and said we needed to keep the races separate so the Aryan master race could rule over everyone else and become gods. The Swedish poet Strindberg loved his book and called Liebenfels a prophetic voice. The next year, Liebenfels started a magazine called Ostara where he was the only writer. He claimed to have thousands of subscribers, but that's likely not true. Someone that actually did read his writings was Adolf Hitler. Jorg claimed that he himself gave young Hitler the idea of the Nordic godmen of the Aryan civilization in 1909, way before the Thule Society or the Nazi Party. I should note after all this talk of an Aryan race that one did exist. The Aryan civilization lived in Eurasia from about 4000 to 1000 BC, but they were definitely not Germanic. They were Indo-Iranian. Adolf Hitler and the Spear of Destiny. The most powerful artifact coveted by Adolf Hitler was a holy spear used centuries earlier by Constantine the Great. But just how powerful was this weapon? If it was so great, why didn't it win Hitler the war? The legend of the Holy Lance takes us back 2,000 years. When Jesus Christ was crucified in Jerusalem, a Roman soldier named Longinus stabbed him in the ribs to make sure he was dead. When the spear pierced the flesh of Christ and blood spilled onto it, the ordinary weapon became a holy relic. For 2 millennia, warlords, kings, and emperors have fought for possession over the Holy Lance. It is said that whoever wields the weapon has the power to conquer the world. The lance's most famous owner was Constantine the Great, who attributed their success to owning the Holy Lance, also known as the Spear of Destiny. Constantine was the emperor who officially declared Christianity the state religion of Rome. During the First Crusade, Christian knights found themselves at a disadvantage while fighting at the siege of Antioch. They were close to giving up when a soldier discovered the holy spear stashed underneath the altar of the Temple of St. Peter. The spear inspired such incredible morale in the soldiers that they went on to win the battle in June 1098. Before Hitler, Napoleon Bonaparte tried to get his hands on the spear as he fought through Europe, but the Habsburg dynasty hid the relic in a safe and secret spot. Napoleon never acquired the spear, and he failed to take over the world. But Hitler did get it. At least the myth tells us he did. When the Nazis took Vienna in 1938, myth says that Hitler went straight to the place where the lance was kept and stole it for himself. It was at the Hofburg Museum right until Hitler had it transported to his headquarters in Berlin. Hitler kept the spear in an underground hideout until his death on April 30th, 1945. The spear was recovered, along with other artifacts Hitler considered of most value. Another part of the legend is that General George Smith Patton was there when the spear was found, and that he was tempted to steal it back to the United States. The general was supposedly drawn to its power. He was like Frodo trying to figure out whether he should throw the ring into the volcano or not. In the end, the mighty relic was taken back to its home in Austria, and it remains there to this day. The Spear of Destiny is still controversial. Many experts don't believe it's what everyone else thinks it is. No one's ever been able to prove that the weapon was used to stab Christ while he hung on the cross. You might also be interested in knowing that the Nazis tried to find the Holy Grail, Thor's hammer, and the Ark of the Covenant. Heinrich Himmler went looking for the Grail himself in 1940 in Catalonia's Montserrat Mountains. None of these artifacts were ever found. The Nazi obsession with magic. Most of what I've discussed with you today involves things in the real world. Bags of gold, weapons, and tangible things that can be touched. Now let's switch things up a bit. In 1935, Heinrich Himmler investigated the magical. The Nazis went on an expedition to study witches and sorcerers. Himmler read an article one day about Kalevala folklore in a Frankfurt newspaper and got an idea. He would send an expedition into Karelia to learn the secrets of witchcraft. Karelia is a very old area in Northern Europe divided between Russia, Finland, and Sweden. It may be divided by modern borders, but in ancient times the borders didn't exist. It was a land of pagan witchcraft and devilry. Even in 1935, Karelia was spooky. It was like the more northern version of Transylvania, which was terrifying and I'm pretty sure overrun with vampires. Himmler was concerned that the sorcerers and witches wouldn't allow the Nazi scientists to take photographs, so they brought along Finnish illustrator Ola Forsell to record their journey in pictures. The Nazis also brought a musicologist named Fritz Bose in hopes of recording pagan chants and figuring out how to extract their magic. The team departed in June 1936 and arrived soon after. They met with a traditional singer who sang them a few songs. They later met someone who could play the traditional Finnish kantele, a unique string instrument. But they needed witches, not musicians. Finally, deep in this mysterious landscape, they found a soothsayer. Her name was Myron Aku, and the local villagers were terrified of her. When the small group of Nazis approached the woman for the first time, she already knew who they were. She said that she had foreseen their arrival. That's creeping me out, and this happened more than 80 years ago. It took some persuading, but the soothsayer agreed to perform a ritual on camera and be recorded by the musicologist. She performed a ritual to summon the spirits of the ancestors and divine future events. And that's all I really know, because that's everything about the expedition that's been recorded. I don't know what the Nazis did with the film or sound recordings. I don't know what happened to the witches of Karelia. The records are blank, as if the results of the expedition have been scrubbed from existence. What do you think is the craziest thing the Nazis were interested in? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and come back soon for more shocking secrets on ancient history.